fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And we are officially done yelling about romance movies and books and tropes that we hate. For anyone who, isn't aware, February is Black History Month, and we decided that it would be nice to shine a little bit of a spotlight over here on the podcast, and obviously also over on our website at fullybooked.ca, so you guys can always refer over to there as well if you want to see some of the articles that we have that have previously covered some Black literature and things that we found interesting. And we thought that we would kick off this kind of second half of the month with an adaptation that feels, quite appropriate for Black History Month, in the sense that it's speaking a lot about achievements by people of color.
Yep.
At a time that was very important in the United States.
Yep.
And so today we're talking about the 2016 adaptation of Hidden Figures, which, is one of those movies, I think, also that I will say neither of us are very into space stuff.
No.
Like, at all.
Not at all.
But the movie does do quite a good job of, I guess, creating an element of intrigue in the story too. Obviously, I think because of the characters mostly and what's happening to them throughout the course of the story. If everything were calculations to do with a space launch, we would have been asleep.
Yeah, I think that the space launch part of this was, secondary portion of the story.
Kind of, yes. It was more about the women themselves who were working at NASA at the time the movie set in the 1960s and, when all of this was actually taking place. So yeah, we may as well just jump right into it.
Jim is a tall glass of water.
He's coming over.
Now, why would he be doing that?
Cause Mary's waving at me.
No! Dorothy, slice of pie?
I love one.
You already have a slice of pie, Dorothy.
Oh, left and left about it.
You're a computer at NASA. You let women handle that sort of...
Yes, it's an uphill battle.
Yes, they let women do some things at NASA, Mr. Johnson. And it's not because we wear skirts. It's because we wear glasses.
We go from being our father's daughters to our husband's.
Hidden Figures was released in 2016 and is an adaptation of the novel of the same name by a nonfiction author by the name of Margot Lee Shetterly. This was her first book, so that's impressive. Wow. And this movie came out the same year as the book, so I can only assume when she was completing the book, they were optioning the film as well, basically, at the same time.
That's really cool. I don't know how often I've heard of that happening.
I feel like it hardly ever happens. There are like some bidding wars sometimes, though. If something is generating a lot of buzz, there does seem to be there do seem to be times where some adaptations do that, but it doesn't happen very often.
Interesting.
So Hidden Figures currently has a score of 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb and 93% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I believe that.
And I double-checked, and the critic score and the audience score is the same, which almost never happens.
Believe that. It was a great movie.
It's a really, interesting, very interesting story, and also, I think, sheds a light. And I think until this film came out, I sure didn't know that there were women of color working at NASA in the 1960s doing calculations for some of the most important launches that ever occurred in NASA's history.
Oh, and like in an entire department of them,
Yes, of women who were just working and doing this. I mean, first of all, like you said right off the bat, you're like, wow, I'm surprised that in the 1960s there were this many women working
at NASA
at all.
Just women in general.
Oh, yeah.
And they were doing calculations, all of them. They were they called them computers.
Yes,
and
because this was prior to the invention of a machine computer.
Right. Well, it was kind of happening at the same time,
yes,
right?
Yeah, they were being introduced.
Bringing in the IBM computer at the same time.
Which, if you guys have never seen what a computer looked like in the 60s, you needed an entire room for it.
Oh, yes.
Like a warehouse space.
This is quite well known, and I think it was up until probably the 80s that this is how big computers were.
Massive.
And it was so interesting. I was watching this movie, and I'm like, wow, these women would have had to be very good at calculating, because the whole purpose of their job was to double check calculations that had been made and then triple check them.
I can't even do math in my head.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They would have had to be excellent at what
Just
they did.
Incredibly well trained. So Hidden Figures itself follows the story of 3 real life women who were working in Langley at NASA in the 50s and 60s. And in a lot of cases, they had been there for a number of years and stayed for a number of years following the events of the story itself. So the three women's names were Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughn, and Mary Jackson. I would say that Katherine Johnson is sort of the main focus to a certain extent of the story. She was, a mathematician who worked originally as a computer at NASA and became the first African-American woman, and I believe maybe African-American at all, to work on the calculations for the Space Task Group that existed in the 50s and 60s that were a major part of the space race, basically. This was in the early 60s when the U.S. was fighting very, very hard to get a manned operation into space, and they had been pushing for this really hard because the Russians technically got there first. They did send a man up prior to maybe a year prior to the Americans. It was a very close race, and the race would continue all the way into 1969 when the Apollo 11 mission went to the moon. And then again, like with other shuttle missions as well, it sort of just continued after that point too. So this sort of follows them in their lives, but also what they were able to accomplish and what, they continued to do after the events kind of the story. Obviously, there are liberties taken in the sense that I don't believe that all of these events that each of the three characters' experiences were happening at the exact same time. I think they were happening probably within the period of a decade or so.
Yeah, and I don't think that, that they were this close of friends, the three of them.
No,
think,
not from what I've read.
For the sake of the movie, it really helped develop the characters and make them a lot more lovable, I suppose.
Yes.
You really felt like an affinity with them because they were the three friends. But no, and I said this to Megan when we were watching it. I was like, did this all happen at the same time? Were these three women, yes, they were working together at NASA. They
didn't know each other.
They did know each other, but they weren't best friends. And, obviously all of the events in this movie happened between within 5 or 7 years, not
at the absolute most. I think it might be within a 2-year period.
Yeah, I don't think that it was all happening in the time frame that they depicted, but of course it's a movie, so
I get it. It makes sense. Things are happening consecutively to all of these different people, and it's interesting that way, and it keeps you interested in the plot as well. If you had to watch mundane things go on for a long time, you would be pretty fucking bored. So basically the film starts off with the three of them, Katherine, Dorothy, and Mary, are all driving to work. Well, they were driving to work, but their car broke down.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out what's wrong with it. At this time, also keep in mind that in 1961, Virginia was still a segregated state. That is where Langley's headquarters are, in Virginia. And so at this time, there would have still been some segregation happening. My understanding, from what I read a little bit about Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Vaughn and Mary Jackson, is that there was segregation at NASA that did continue, because legally it was expected to, I believe, into the 60s. But I know that she was indicating that in 1958, a lot of that was kind of shifting a bit. And Katherine Johnson herself did say she never felt particularly discriminated against, and she more felt like just another member of the team, and everybody was sort of just treated each other the exact same way because they were all doing the same job.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this was the time when, JFK was president,
yes,
and the federal government, whatever you call it in the States, the main government, they had started to say, no more segregation, and they
yes,
were really trying to stop that. It was during the time of, Martin Luther King and everything happening, but unfortunately, Virginia was a segregated state at the time.
And unfortunately, the southern states, many of them did take longer for segregation to come to an end. So they do, they kind of show that. You do see that in several different areas of the town that they're in and things like that. There are bathrooms that people are expected to go to. People of color are expected to go to water fountains that they need to drink out of.
And they're expected to sit at the back of the classroom.
Yeah.
And, back of the meeting room. And so there's a lot of that.
So I think that I do think, though, that even if, hopefully, and I hope that was the case, even if at NASA, people weren't necessarily experiencing as much discrimination as they were outside, because so much of the film takes place at NASA, it is probably a good thing that they kind of added some of those elements, so at least like the audience gets a feel for potentially the segregation and the racial profiling that was happening at that time.
Yeah, and so, even the start of the movie, they're trying to fix their car. Dorothy is the mechanic in the group.
Yeah,
she's trying to fix the car, and a police officer shows up, and, the three of them get visibly nervous. He talks to them for a bit, asks them for their ID. They say that they're trying to go to work to NASA. And so
because they're trying to help with the space launch.
That's right.
And when they mention that, those boys are going to be our saviors. They're a bunch of heroes. And they're all sitting there like, yes, whatever helps. So then, of course, he gives them a police escort once they get the car up and running to Langley.
Yep.
Which is interesting. And when they get there, you kind of, obviously part of the segregation that you see is that they're part of what was called the West End group. So they're a group of African-American women who are in like their own building kind of off to the side, and they do work doing the computing basically for all of these coordinates and everything and the double checks that need to be done. So what basically the Space Task Group, meanwhile, needs a computer to work with them because they need someone to do the double checks, and because Katherine is brilliant, like we see
that in the opening of the movie.
There's a flashback
showing how brilliant she is and how she was 2 grades ahead. They brought her up 2 grades faster. She was accepted into this school for gifted children. So they allude to that. So we know that Katherine is really the she is very exceptional in what she does. Yes,
she's extremely intelligent, and it's pretty clear. And I was actually reading as well that in order for her to be able to attend the special school that she did, at the start of every school year, her parents would drive them 200 miles away for her to be able, and I think her siblings as well, to be able to go to these good institutions who gave that, where they were able to get like a higher education. So
crazy, eh?
I know, it's wild.
Wow.
Yeah. So because she's very good at what she does, Katherine's chosen to work with the Space Task Group sort of, and kind of be their computer. And she arrives there to people who are very confused to see her, even though, like, if you knew somebody was coming to help the calculation, whatever.
No, but they're just, it's a room full of white men.
It's a room full of white dudes, which I'm sure is probably still what part of NASA looks like.
Probably. And she shows up, and they don't really know what to do with this. And, within the first, few minutes of her sitting down, they're very salty. The character played by Jim Parsons.
Yes.
He is told to give his calculations to her for her to compute.
Yes.
And he redacts a whole bunch of information from it and drops it on her. And she's like, how am I supposed to figure this out without any of the right information? And he says, well, you work with what you have. So he dumps it on her. And then within about, 30 seconds, she realizes that she has to go to the bathroom. She has to pee. And that poses a conundrum, as Megan just alluded to, because they do have segregated bathrooms.
And she did have to. So she goes to see the admin, who's like the woman who's kind of their office manager type.
The only woman in the office.
Yeah, the only other woman in the office, who's like, I don't know where your bathroom is. And so she realized that she has to go all the way back to the building that the West End group works in generally, because I guess that's the only bathroom for people of color. And so she has to go all the way back there, and she says it's half a mile away. So she's going to run.
So she runs all the way there and runs back. And, bear in mind, she's had 3 kids. So, like,
when you got to pee, you got to pee.
You got to pee.
So one thing I was curious, I kind of looked into, like, some of the fact and fiction, because, when you're making a film, you do change certain things around to make, to make it more dramatic for the audience and stuff. So what I did read did indicate, yes, there were some segregated bathrooms at NASA, and Mary Jackson, who's actually played by Janelle Monáe in the film, she petitioned to have that abolished because it seemed absurd to her, obviously. But Katherine Johnson herself said she did not care at all, and she just used whatever bathroom was close to her when she had to pee, which is fine.
Well, I mean, I think at that point, like, that's what you just would do. And then, because I was watching it and I'm like, I would just go to the closest bathroom, but I wasn't there at the time. So, that's probably just my privilege speaking, like you probably wouldn't dare. And so she comes back, she starts doing her calculations, and then she wants to go and get a cup of coffee. And did you notice that everyone in the room, their coffee cup was white and hers was brown?
Hers was brown.
And so
like she got the little crappy leftover one because they had like larger.
She brought it with her.
Oh, yes, she brought it with her from her thing. Yeah, that's it, because they weren't going to give her one.
Right.
So she had to bring her own mug.
So she's just doing her calculations. She stands up absentmindedly to go get a cup of coffee. She pours the coffee from the carafe that's there. And
For the white people.
And they're all just staring at her. And she's kind of like, and then she goes and sits back down. The next morning, they've put a coffee pot that said colored on it. Just for her.
Just for her. Oh, how nice. Oh, how lovely.
Yeah.
Everybody's not going to feel discriminated against whatsoever. So she's dealing with that. Meanwhile, you got Kevin Costner up in the office playing a character named Al Harrison, who's the boss. He's the one in charge of the Space Task Group, basically. And I think based on that, almost in charge of NASA to a certain extent, because that would have been the most important thing that they were working on at that time.
For sure.
So while this is happening, Mary Jackson, like I said, played by Janelle Monáe, she's assigned to work on the heat shield for the space capsule. That's what she's doing at the beginning. She's in the room where they're about to run a test and they're counting down, and she gets her heel stuck in a grate and she has to leave her I feel bad for her, because she's walking around for the rest of the day with one shoe on because it gets stuck.
Just go barefoot at that point.
I would just take my other shoe off. Yeah. So she's working with that team, and she helps them identify what looks like a design flaw basically in the heat shield. And her mentor leader, who I also, if I'm not mistaken from what I was reading, is based on a real person as well, named Carl. He's actually, I double checked. I was like, is there a Russian guy working here? That's weird. He's a Polish Jewish Holocaust survivor.
And the actor who plays him was in Home Alone 3.
Was he?
Yeah, it's one of the Russian.
Why do you know that? Home Alone 3. Ugh.
It was with the kid there and the Russians. And
I don't know. And get past Home Alone 2, past New York, I don't know what to tell you.
Anyway.
Oh boy.
This
anyway.
guy's like typecast as like a Russian dude, like a Eastern European.
He probably
person.
is Eastern European.
I think he is.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So because of this, he encourages her. He's like, hey, you should work with us as an engineer, because I think that you really have the mind for it. So she applies for the position, but she's told by Kirsten Dunst's character, whose name is Mrs. Mitchell, who's, I guess, I don't know, a floor supervisor, a building supervisor?
No, I think she's a supervisor for the white women calculators.
Oh, you're right. Yes, you're right.
But by default, she ends up being the supervisor
for the women in general.
The women in general.
Yes.
And I think that they mentioned that there had been another supervisor.
Well, there was a supervisor for the group
for the black women.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that she's been off sick or something for a year, and they haven't had a replacement. And she says to her, "Yeah, well, it's been running pretty smoothly for a year." And Dorothy goes, "Well, that's because I've been doing the supervisor's job."
And that is an incredibly relatable thing. I think the number of people who, like, a boss quits or someone in a management position quits at a job, and you or someone else is doing the job of a supervisor with no additional pay and no additional title or recognition.
Yep.
It happens all the time. It happens to this day.
Yep. And I think it happens to women a lot because we tend to see something, we want to fix it, we want to help people.
Well, because we're like, someone needs to help with this.
Someone needs to take the lead, someone needs to help. And so, naturally she kind of fit into that position. And so she gets rejected from a supervisor position that she had applied for.
Yeah, so Dorothy gets rejected from that. Mary gets rejected from being an engineer because despite the fact that she has some sort of double bachelor's degree in math and science or something, I forget what it is. Anyway, she's very smart. She needs to take specific engineering courses in order to qualify.
Yeah.
So she starts looking into that and then realizes that the only way that she can do that is to take courses at a local high school that are given in the evenings, I guess.
And it's an all-white school.
So she's, of course, thinking she won't be able to join, but Mary's character is very determined. I hope the real Mary Jackson was like this, because she's quite funny. Yeah. And so what she decides to do is to file a court petition to get permission to attend the high school, to attend these courses so that she can get her certification and work as an engineer. Her husband is not super down with this.
Well, I think her husband worries that she's going to be disappointed and
because it's not going to work.
Because it's not going to happen. You know, he starts saying to her, like, you know, civil rights aren't always civil. Like, I think he's very much, like, you know, into what Martin Luther King is saying at this point. You know, like, he's saying that they have to fight for what they want, and he's kind of suggesting that the way she wants to go about it will not get her where she wants to go, and he's worried that she's going to be disappointed. But as she replies to him, there's more than one way of doing something.
Yes, exactly. You know? So she decides that's what she's going to do. All these people as well, you do see, like, everybody's, like, husband as well, which I believe they all have the name of the women's real life husbands and partners that they did have, basically, at this time. So while this is going on, they're at, like, a church picnic. Yeah. And Katherine at that time meets her future husband, or second husband, I should say, because we're given to understand that her first husband passed away.
Right.
So she meets her second husband there, and he takes an immediate interest, and she's kind of like, no, please leave me alone.
Yeah, she's like, no.
Like, you're very attractive, but go away.
I feel like that would be anybody's attitude. That was like, I have 3 little girls,
yeah,
and I'm
she's
very
got
busy
3
at work.
children at home. Her mother helps her with everything, but, like, it's a lot to do. So while Mary's dealing with that, so basically you've got Katherine dealing with people who won't give her the information she needs to do her fucking job properly. Right. You've got Mary dealing with not being able to get her own certification for the job she'd like to do. And then Dorothy, who's doing the job of someone that she's getting no credit for at all, and not getting any kind of promotion, recognition for that.
And no you know, promotion in sight, no encouragement in sight. Like, it's very much like, stay where you are.
Yeah, it's terrible. So
meanwhile, they're wheeling this giant IBM computer into the building, which is like, this is kind of like happening in the background, and it's like a little bit funny because they haven't, like, calculated how to get it into the building correctly.
Oh yeah, they have to knock down one of the doors or something.
So, like, this is all happening in the background, and, like, you know, Dorothy, who's very intelligent, you know, she's looking at this and she starts asking questions and saying, like, what is this thing? And they're like, oh, that's the IBM. It can do calculations in no time. And so
she's like, fuck.
She's piecing this together, and she realizes that that's the future of computers.
Actual computers, machine computers, not human beings. So she realizes the engineers who are working on this they can't figure it out.
They keep on programmers.
Yeah, because that's it. They've never learned programming or coding or anything. So she basically she buys a book or takes a book out from the library about programming, and late at night she goes in, she starts reading it, and she starts teaching herself how to run this computer properly.
And she teaches her team how to do it too.
And then she teaches her team, like, kind of on the side as well, like, hey, this is what I've been doing, this is what I'm working on. And at one point, the engineers, or the guys who are, I guess, supposed to be programmers, come back in, and they're like, you know, and they're like, oh no, get away, you're going to ruin something or whatever. And of course, she's made something work because the code was never printing off correctly that they needed. And they're like, who are you? Like, how did you do this? Yeah. So at the same time, basically, obviously, we're getting to the point now where all the fancy shit is going on because the astronauts are getting ready to launch, because they're working on what they called them, the Mercury 7. These were 7 astronauts who worked on these original manned missions into space. And all of the members of the staff basically are given the opportunity to meet them when they arrive at Langley.
Oh,
yeah, they're given the opportunity to meet them when they arrive at Langley, including John Glenn, he was a very famous astronaut. He is the only one. I don't know if this actually happened or not. I know that it's been indicated that, yes, they did meet the astronauts. The astronauts were also very excited about what was going on. But I don't think there's any specific record of this one interaction, because as John Glenn's going down the line and meeting people, he's basically cut off by the office admin prior to reaching the women of color who are all at the end. They've all been stuck at the end of the line. And he's like, well, they're still people.
Yeah,
like,
I'm just going to go hi to
talk to them too. So he does. He goes and has like a little chat with them and is very charming, of course.
Yeah.
So, who knows? I don't know if this happened or not. Hopefully it did. That would be nice. Yeah. I hope John Glenn was a cool guy is all I can say. I don't know anything about astronauts, but I hope he was a nice person. Yeah. So basically at the same time that this happens, basically Katherine is able to, she's still getting all this redacted garbage, but she's able to figure out that if you hold up the paper to the light, you can kind of see some of the other calculations. Because, like if you put permanent marker over something, like you can still see through if you look up in the, like to the light. So she solves a very complicated and complex equation, even with all the redacted shit. And Al, her boss, is like, what the fuck? Like, how did you do that? And so, of course, she says this to him, and he's like, oh, okay, so maybe we should stop redacting things so much and just give her the information that she needs.
He asks her if she's a Russian spy.
Oh my God.
She's like, am I what?
She's like, am I what? And he goes, are you a Russian spy? And she's like, no, I'm not Russian.
And then he looks at the admin, and she's like, no, she's not Russian.
She's not Russian.
And so he's like, fine, just give her whatever she needs. And so he's kind of irritated that she could see the classified information.
Yes, and of course, Jim Parsons' character, Paul Stafford, is also annoyed by all of this because he's the one who's been like, here, this is what you have to work with. Anyway, what has continued to this point that Al loses his shit over eventually is that, of course, Katherine disappears for lengthy periods of time because she has to go to the fucking bathroom. So she'll disappear for 25 minutes at a time or something because she has to pee.
Like, she literally brings her work with her so she can pee and do work
at the same time while she's sitting on the toilet, which is insane. So she's doing that, and of course, every time he needs her, he's like, well, where is she? Where is she? Where is she? She's not there because it takes her forever to get back. So he confronts her very angrily and abruptly in front of all the people in the room. Ick. You call someone up to your office if you need to talk to them.
Yeah, but I think this is like, old style leadership.
I know, but also this is probably supposed to be a very dramatic scene because she, accosts him right back and is like, I have to run half a mile in that direction to relieve myself, and that's absurd.
And then she starts yelling about her coffee pot.
And then she starts yelling about the fact that she's like, and then I have to drink coffee from a pot that no one here wants to touch.
Yeah.
And everybody treats her like human garbage, basically.
And then she just immediately excuses herself to go eat her lunch. Like, I'm like, good on you, girl.
I think she was leaving because she thought she would just be fired for her outburst. I'm pretty sure that's what that was.
Well, yeah, but then she's like back with like her colleagues from earlier, the next scene.
Yeah, so basically, this leads to first of all, this never happened, so nobody worry about that. But this leads to what I understand is kind of a divisive scene for people, and probably one of like the less well-liked scenes of the film, where, that's it. She's eating lunch with colleagues and come out into the hallway because they can hear something to find that Al has taken a crowbar to the sign above the bathroom that says colored bathroom and has started knocking it down. And he does make a good point where he's like, we all pee the same color at NASA, so it doesn't really matter. But I do understand
beef is the savior complex,
it's the white savior sort of trope that kind of comes out of that of like, oh yes, big strong white man did something and saved everybody. And the way that it's done, he very much is declaring like segregation's over at NASA, and I'm like, no, legally you would never have been able to do that at that time, but it's fine, whatever. It just means means she can start peeing wherever she fucking wants to. Great.
Within reason.
Super.
So the movie continues. She's obviously making a lot more progress, and then the closer they're getting to this launch, understandably, the more stressful everything's getting. And to the point where, everything's moving so quickly that the calculations are changing daily. And so with the work that she's been given to do, her work that she's spending days doing becomes obsolete right away. And so she gets really irritated and kind of makes a stand and says, I have to be part of the Pentagon briefings so I can get all the information
And I love that their answer is there's no protocol for a woman attending. And I'm like, well, if there's no protocol, then she should just be able to go.
Well, then she should be able to do it, and Kevin Costner's character says to her, you're not going to let this go, are you? And she goes, no.
No, and he's like, okay, fine, just don't say anything.
Come on. Anything.
So, of course, they go into the room and they are having these proper conversations. And again, they don't have the answer for what the trajectory or calculations should look like until they ask her, and she walks over to the board and does whatever she does. They say, how long is it going to take to get to this calculation? And so he gives her the chalk and says, go do it now. Like, I thought that was kind of a dick move. It worked out well for her. That's like a flub of like, I don't know here.
Yeah, I don't know here. Somebody else do it.
Somebody else go do it. So she does, and she does it properly. And of course, John Glad's sitting there like, oh great, okay, well I'm really glad this woman's working on this. That's nice. Unfortunately, because of the the IBM machine getting up to par and it's starting to work properly and provide all of these calculations.
Thanks to Dorothy.
Yes. Well, ironically, her and her team as well. She's like brought all the girls up to do this with her. And so because of this, unfortunately, the Space Task Group is basically saying they don't need a human computer working with them anymore. So technically that's like a demotion for Katherine. She's like put back into just like working with the others downstairs, basically, with the West End group. And they're like, oh, we'll try to,
Find something else for you.
Luckily, I guess, in other parts, at least for now, Mary Jackson has petitioned the court and been awarded the right to attend the classes at the high school for engineering, which she does, and eventually graduates. Wonderful. So happy. And Dorothy is eventually awarded the position of supervisor of the West End group, so of all of the women of color who are working at NASA, and to work specifically on the IBM machine with them.
Right, but I think that at that point, like, her team was the only team who could work on the IBM computer.
Yeah, they were.
And so, it's not even like a segregated thing anymore. It was, here you go, like, you're the supervisor for this team. And
I think it was the IBM team specifically.
That's right. And then the other woman, played by Kirsten Dunst's character, says, like, some of the girls on my team would also like to learn about it because it's the future, So I think there's just, like, this insinuation that it ends up being, like, just everyone on the team. Doesn't matter, what you look like. And so...
And this is true in the sense that Dorothy Vaughn was the first supervisor of, I believe, both the West End group and probably the IBM group as well at NASA, in the same way that Mary Jackson, once she completed her courses, was the first African-American female engineer at NASA as well. When all of this is sort of coming to a close, obviously the climax sort of ends with, John Glenn's shuttle launch. He goes up there. There is a malfunction with the heat shield.
No, but before he goes up there,
yes, that's true. They're like
coordinates
the numbers
that the IBM machine had put out, and
they
realized that there was like a difference between the ones from the day before and then the day of, and so, they're telling John Glenn this, and he says, "Get Katherine to do it. If she says that it's okay, then I'm good with it." So
I love that he's like, he's like, get the girl to look at the numbers, because he saw her
the
and he
smart
saw
one,
and they're just like, Katherine. He's like, yeah, the smart one. If she says that they're good, then that's fine.
Yeah. And so
she does.
She does. Like, it's all a little stressful, and she gets that done. She's allowed in the room then, like in the control room for the launch. She's watching all this, and then as he's up in the air, like Megan just said, it starts to malfunction. Something with the heat shield. It's
loose, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It's coming loose, so that can fuck things up. So that's it. If the heat shield is loose, then potentially the whole shuttle could burn up on re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. So he would just die, basically. So she helps them a little bit with also, like, she'd done these calculations. She also helps with the suggestion to leave like a particular attachment that I think you're supposed to let go of at some point. And she's like, no, it's fine, because it'll hold the heat shield in place. Yeah. She agrees with them. That's what they do. And then, of course, it's a totally successful launch. And John Glenn is fine, because I believe the man passed away in his 90s.
Yeah, like he had, I think it said at the end that he had three successful successful missions
or something. Yeah, exactly. So no problem. The rocket's called Friendship 7, and it lands, or the capsule, I should say, and it lands successfully after it re-enters correctly. And, it's made pretty clear that a lot of that is because of her. So that's kind of like, there is kind of a wrap up that you get at the end. There's a lot of, I guess, what worked really well is like the interspersing of a lot of their personal stuff. You know, Katherine getting remarried to Jim Johnson, her new husband, and just sort of like, like Mary being able to get to graduate and to become an engineer, and her husband like legitimately supporting her really by the end and being very proud of her and everything. So in the end, all of them worked for NASA for several decades, and they all managed to accomplish all of these very impressive feats. And it's weird. I guess not, but it should be weird that no one has talked about it for a very long time. Although in 2015, Katherine Johnson was awarded the Medal of Honor by Obama, if I'm not mistaken. And then I believe she passed away in 2020. She was 101 years old.
They were all quite old.
They
weren't
were.
they?
Yeah, I think Mary Jackson may have been the youngest. She was in her mid-80s, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Dorothy Vaughn was also 98, 97, something like that. Very impressive women. Very impressive.
They really are, you know. And I think these stories are so important to hear. There's hundreds and thousands of stories like this. You know, I'd be curious what our listeners would put forth as their favorite story for Black History Month.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, this was a really, really interesting movie to watch, and it really just made me think, how many more stories are there like this out there, you know, that we just don't know about?
That we don't know about, that's it, women of color in all sorts of different fields and their accomplishments, and how, that's it, we just never hear about so many of them.
Just how, you know, in general, like the history of, you know, North America and how Black people have helped us build it to what it is today.
Yeah, that's it. And there's not nearly enough recognition for that.
I agree.
No. So what do you guys think of this movie? I think it was quite popular when it was released, so I'd be very curious to know, like, what other people think of it. Have you seen it? Do you love it? Do you hate it for some reason? Because I'm always curious to know about, like, a differing opinion about something as well. So you can let us know about that over on Instagram at fullybookedca, and you can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. And if you're still with us, which I hope you are, for the rest of this month, you can leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to this episode, because it really helps us get the show out in front of more people.
Yeah.
But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.